I love to fly my little aircraft into gnarly farm strips, and I've built this channel around showing just how much fun this can be. However, off-airport operations always come with that extra risk, be it short runways, rough ground, mobile hazards, contaminated surfaces, or obstacles on the approach or departure. Taking an aircraft into these places demands the utmost respect and the ability to adapt to what can sometimes be an ever-changing environment. Even though the UK is not exactly sparsely populated, many small farm strips are located on private land, well away from people or assistance, and I've often wondered what I would do if something did go wrong and I ended up needing help. This time on Short Field, I want to look at how an aircraft crash happened to a fellow sport cruiser pilot on a small farm strip set on a little island off the west coast of Scotland, where the combination of the short strip, changeable weather and a misjudged landing ended up with a severely damaged aircraft, and how the immediate aftermath of dealing with the first responders turned out to be, well, quite an eye-opener. 370 miles northwest of London and 30 miles to the northwest of Glasgow lies the beautiful little Scottish Isle of Bute. It's 47 square miles in area, and its only town of Rothesay is home to most of its 6,500 population. The island has no bridge from the mainland, and you can only travel there by ferry or boat, unless of course you're a private pilot with a suitable aircraft where you have the option to flying directly into the little grass strip at Bute. Bute airstrip is sited in the southern area of the island and is really nothing more than a field with no facilities. The runway is cut into the rough grass and is orientated 0927 at 480 metres or 1,570 feet long, and the strip sits at just 50 feet above mean sea level. Apart from a small road running across the 27 threshold, the approaches are clear. Flying into the airfield is pretty straightforward during the summer months, but it can suffer from fog and poor weather at any time, and the winds can get particularly sporting due to the open terrain all year round. The airstrip is run by local pilots and relies on these volunteers to keep the field serviceable, which includes keeping the grass cut. However, as this is voluntary, it is not always in perfect condition, and updates to the current status of the field is usually circulated on social media. James is a private pilot who owns a lovely 2012 sport cruiser based at Echo Golf Papa Kilo, Prestwick in Scotland. He bought his aircraft in 2017 and has built up a fair bit of experience flying it up and down the UK. The Isle of Bute is a regular local trip for him, and he has flown in and out of the strip there many times. But on this occasion, things didn't go to plan, and it means he won't be flying back home again today. I'll let James take up the story from here.
So I bought my sport cruiser 2017, got roughly 265 hours on her. On the morning of the incident, it was quite a surreal moment. I had just turned 400 hours flying, and I sat in the morning with a coffee and I put a few Facebook posts thanking people for helping my journey, achieving the pilot's license, a lifelong dream. And I was feeling really good, but I had no plans of flying. I had a beautiful flight the day before, and I was planning on spending a Saturday doing other things. A friend of mine called and said, hey, why don't we go over to Bute for the day for lunch? So I decided, okay. It wasn't the best of days, but there was certainly enough, height to get to Bute and back, which is only a short 20-minute flight from Prestwick Airport. Yeah. So a very regular place. It's an evening jaunt for us, a nice summer's evening, 15-20 minutes flight. On the day I decided, okay, I'll come over. So the first thing that happened was I couldn't find my house keys, my car keys, and spent ages looking for that. Very minor thing, but eventually I found the car keys and headed to the airport, and I was running 5-10 minutes late. And then when I got to the airport, I thought my front tyre was slightly flat, so I pumped up the tyre. Now I'm 25-30 minutes late. My friends were meeting me there. I think it was 12 o'clock, I can't remember the exact time, and off I went.
So, after a bit of an annoying start, and with his friends already at Bute, James departs the massive 3 kilometre or 1.8 mile long runway 30 at Prestwick, solo and into good weather. He then turns northwesterly to follow the coast up towards West Kilbride for the short sea crossing to Bute.
Now the next thing that happened was I couldn't bond my Bluetooth to my mobile phone, just wouldn't connect. I usually use my Bose A20s connected to the phone. Not an important thing at that point, not being able to bond the phone. It's a nice to have but not a necessity. So off I went, and as I approached the island of Bute, I could see a rain squall over the top of the island. Nowhere else, it's one of those ones where you see the rain coming down over a very particular spot. So the rain was directly over the top of the runway. It was the only place that the rain was, I could see a shower for miles and miles around. So I did approach through the rain, and I had a lot of rain on the windscreen, but it was fine. The propeller, wash, pushed the rain back, and I knew it was very isolated because it was very evident. You could see it from the sky. I looked at the windsock. The windsock was flat. My friend's aircraft was orientated into the wind, which to me showed that he had landed on 27. 27 is an interesting runway. 27 used to have trees on the threshold, and when I was a younger student pilot and young in my pilot hours, I used to be quite frightened of those trees. They were quite imposing just on the runway, so I would always do quite a steep approach, and that caused me to land quite long. The trees are cut down now, they have been for a few years, but I am so used to landing long that I did my usual landing. In the sport cruiser it stops in 70 to 100 metres anyway on dry grass, and the runway is 480 metres long, so landing round about the 250 metres is usually okay. Saves me taxiing, plenty of runway, plenty of stopping distance. So I came in and did my circuit, and on my base leg, as I turned onto base, I couldn't see the runway. I could not identify the runway. I knew where it was because I'd been so often. I was staring straight at it, but there was no visible runway. There was just a huge green field. Made me think, why can't I see the runway? But didn't think any deeper than that. So I continued my turn onto final, and aligned myself for where I knew the runway was. It's very evident when you're used to it where the runway is, even though I couldn't actually see the runway. Still never dawned on me why I couldn't see the runway. Turned out the reason why, the grass hadn't been cut for quite a long time, and the whole field was the same length, so all the grass was the same green, and there was no distinct piece cut out the middle for the runway. So I now did my usual approach and came down to land, and as I touched down I was around 250 metres of the runway remaining. I was carrying a slight bit extra speed, which I didn't intend to do, but looking at Sky Demon later, I actually landed about 10 knots over my normal landing speed, which contributed to what happened next. As soon as I touched down, I realised the aircraft was not slowing down like I normally would expect it to see. I wouldn't normally need to brake. I would normally let the aircraft come to a rolling halt. So I tried to brake, and as I braked, the aircraft shimmied to the right a little bit, and then I corrected it back to the left, and then I realised that the aircraft was really doing its own thing. I thought about a go around. To be honest, I should have done a go around when I was coming into land initially, but now I'm on the ground, the aircraft's unstable, it's moving on its axis on this wet slippery grass, and I realised that doing a go around was probably more dangerous than not. So I was thinking of aquaplaning in a car, taking the foot off the brake, trying to press the brakes on and off. Nothing was really helping, and the aircraft was destined to hit the fence at the far end. I pulled my straps tight, loosened the canopy, and turned off both of the mags. Again, retrospectively, if I turned them off the minute I knew the aircraft was sliding, that may have also contributed and gave me an extra few feet. It's amazing what you think about after an event. So I collided with the fence. Just prior to colliding, the front nose leg collapsed as it hit a little bunding before the fence, which made the aircraft rise up over the fence and then collapse on top of the fence. But anyway, I stepped out, I got out the aircraft, and I ran away from the aircraft. I went to the front because it was sitting nose down, and it was much easier to run towards the front. The propeller was stopped, it was embedded into the ground. Well, it wasn't embedded, but it was lying on the ground. I ran away to the aircraft to the front, and composed myself, looked back at the aircraft, no smoke, no signs of fire, So I then went back to the aircraft and turned everything else off that I hadn't turned off, because I hadn't turned the master off before I ran out the aeroplane. I went back, turned everything off, made sure it was safe, had a look under the wings, saw there was no fuel leaking, etc. And at that point grabbed my a high-vis vest out the back, which was really interesting on a small grass island. But I think it was because it was the only jacket I had was a high-vis vest. So the next thing happens, a golfer comes running towards me, because there's a golf course on the threshold of the runway. Assured him I was okay, and he informed me he had already called 999. The next thing I look up and I see an ambulance, a couple of police cars and a fire engine trying to find their way into the airfield. And that was interesting in its own right, because you've got a small island airfield and the emergency crews didn't know how to get into the airfield. Quite surprised at that. But the emergency crews did arrive and they came driving down the runway. But they came down and I said I was okay and everything was fine and thanks very much for attending, but you know, we're okay to go away. But the ambulance crew wanted to check me for adrenaline. They thought I was going to have post-traumatic, stress, I guess, or something. But once I convinced them I was okay, they left and disappeared. And then the fire brigade got some cutting tools out. They wanted to cut my cowling apart to see to disconnect the engine and the battery, and I implored them to let me go to the aircraft and to disconnect the battery with some tools rather than cutting it open, which they did allow me to do under supervision. And then the fire brigade were happy and they left. Suddenly I'm surrounded by half a dozen locals who were on the walking track, who saw a crashed aeroplane and were taking videos of the whole thing. Now you can assume that a lot of these videos were going onto YouTube. I haven't informed my wife, friends or family that I've just had an aircraft crash. And it's very easy these days for social media to get around really fast. It suddenly dawned on me, my wife could actually hear of me crashing the aeroplane or see a picture of it through herself or one of her friends on social media. So I asked the police to give me a few minutes to make some phone calls to family and friends. They weren't very keen on me doing that at the time because they wanted statements from me at that point in time. But I said, no, I need to make these phone calls. Made a phone call to my wife, told her everything was okay, and then went back to the police and started giving the statements they were requesting. So the next thing was I asked if I could go over to the aircraft, and I asked the policeman if they had any kind of refuse bag, bin bag that I could use to just gather the few things that was in the aircraft. The usual things, headsets, mobile phone, charts, documents, etc. And he said no. He said, I can't let you go near the plane. And I said, why? The fire brigade have declared this site safe. He said, because it's a crime scene. And this was a funny moment, and I said, a crime? Why is it a crime scene? He says, well, my chief inspector has told me that we have to treat it as a crime scene because we have no idea whether you've done anything wrong. And that was an interesting thing. So the policeman said to me, if it was a road traffic accident, we know the rules. We know that we breathalyse you. We know that we can check tyre marks for speeding, etc. A typical road traffic accident investigation. But he had no idea, excuse me, he had no idea of what to do in an aircraft incident. So the best thing was to preserve the scene and keep me in the police car. So I was in effect kind of under arrest without being under arrest. He wouldn't let me leave and he wouldn't let me go back to the aircraft. At that point, someone called me and said, have you phoned the AIB? The Air Accident Investigation Board, and I said no. So I made a call to them, very helpful, and they had already heard about the accident through the police, who had already called them to ask what the police had to do in the event of an accident. Just at that point, the police officer told me that I was free to go to the aircraft, and I was, let's call it, de-arrested, because the AIB had informed the chief inspector that there was nothing to do, there was no crime scene, and to check that I had my pilot's licence, and I was identifying me as the pilot. So the policeman asked me for my pilot's licence. So the policeman now said that I was free to go, but we've got an aircraft now embedded in the fence at the bottom of the runway, and the police had actually, unknown to me, called the farmer that a friend of mine had arranged to come and help, and told the farmer to stand by because they didn't know if they could move the aircraft until the investigation was carried out. So they then released the farmer to come and help me. The farmer came, very gracious, very helpful, moved the aircraft for me. I didn't have any cash on me. I was only planning on going a short journey, and I had a card to pay for lunch. And I said to the farmer, we're going to have to empty the fuel anyway from the aircraft. How would you fancy 120 litres of free petrol in return for helping me move the aircraft? So he was delighted. He got a height, and he came down and siphoned the whole 120 litres out. The recovery company told me the tanks were dry, so he took every single drop of fuel he possibly could out of the aircraft. I had to go home on the ferry that evening from the island. So the following day we went back and we covered her up and we left her. And then we had to go back a day later because the police called me that they were constantly getting calls from passers-by, from walkers on the island who could see an aeroplane with its nose in the ground, thinking it was a fresh crash scene. So 999 was being inundated with calls of a crashed aeroplane. So we went back again the following day and we found a park bench, and we basically lifted the park bench and put it as a support under the nose so the aircraft looked like it was sitting on its legs.
So when did you do the AAIB report? Sort of immediately when you got back, or did you?
Well, I think because it was a Saturday, if I remember, it was the Monday before I got the email, the official email. I completed the form and sent it off. And interesting, the community was very divided, and I think this is an important point. Some people in the community told me, say as little as you possibly can say. I mean, make it absolutely minimal, as if you were in some kind of, police episode of a crime, a TV show. I didn't want to do that. I was happy to tell the story as I am doing here. I made some mistakes. I made a mistake. I probably had the Swiss cheese thing with the tyre being down, with losing the car keys, with not being able to bond the headset. Maybe it was in the rain, the squall. I should have probably gave up then. I should have just decided there was too many things going wrong and not flew. And then when I did land, I should have done a go around as I was coming just over the field and realised the reason why there was no discernible runway was because of the length of the grass. But coming back to the report, some people said be as simple as possible, do not elaborate, do not tell the full story, just say you landed badly and you hit the fence. But I thought everything we've talked about now, the rain squall, the approach, the inability to see the airfield, I think they were important, because the rain squall should have told me that the grass was now soaking wet. The rain hadn't had time to run down the grass into the ground. It was still on the grass. So it's like a huge puddle, I guess. They not being able to see the runway should have been an indicator that the grass hadn't been cut. My inexperience didn't tell me that. And aligning that with the Swiss cheese, I should never have landed that aircraft that day. I've learned a big lesson from it, and hopefully that'll stand me in good stead in the future. And I've reported that when the AIB reports come out officially, you'll be able to read exactly what I've said today, because I thought that was right. The same with the insurance company. I told the insurance company exactly what happened. The insurance company and the AIB were very good. They were both no blame cultures, and they both, I thought, were very efficient in the way they dealt with me. The insurance company has been great. It's not a commercial, so I won't say who they were, but the insurance loss adjuster has been fantastic. Never been a problem. Everything has been handled wonderfully. They helped get the aircraft from the island. They've paid the repairer up front for the parts that's required. They couldn't have been more helpful, and overall the experience of the industry has been great. One other thing, and if any of my friends are watching this, or even people I don't even know, I posted it on the Bute Facebook page. I think within an hour or two of the incident, I had something like 40-50 other aviators, including from other countries, and the same with the Sport Cruiser Forum, wishing me well, saying sorry to see the aircraft and having crashed. And it was a really nice moment for the community, from my perspective, to feel wanted. 4 or 5 people that I respect, who have been flying for a long time, all personally sent me emails showing me pictures of their similar occasions where they had done something similar. And it really helped, because I felt like a useless pilot. I felt like I should just throw away the license. I'd made schoolboy errors, but these people that I really respect with thousands of hours now sent me pictures of their own crashes and said, done that, bought the t-shirt, and it was great, and it really helped, you know, me at that moment in time. It was a very down, when I got home, that's when I got down. When I got home that evening and sat down and realised that my plane was going to be, you know, maybe written off. That was another aspect. We didn't know how costly the damage would be and whether or not the plane may be written off. So but thankfully it's not going to be. Thankfully it's going to be back in the air, hopefully by the end of the year, and looking forward to taking her to Bute again.
So, as James has said, he is having the aircraft repaired under his insurance policy, and hopefully it'll be back in the air soon. Or, in fact, it may already be, depending on when you're watching this video. So, if you see him around, make sure you go up and say hi. I know this one is a little different from my usual offerings, but I thought it was important to remind you. If it doesn't feel right, then don't continue. Thanks again to James for sharing his story, and thank you so much for watching. Fly safe and Short Field out.